So some of the lovely birds we get up there are those high country birds, and sort of concentrated a bit together. Like we get lots of gang cockatoos up there in the summer, and then they often come down into the suburbs during the winter. There's a pair of them who live just next door to me, as in they fly in every morning and then fly out again, which is lovely. And olive whistlers and lyrebirds and pilot birds and just all those lovely higher country birds or wet forest birds.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Birding Today podcast, where birders come together to discuss the joy of birding. I'm your host, Guillaume Doerig. So this week's listener shout out is to Majin Petit, who wrote in saying, "Hi Guillaume, I love listening to your show. I haven't seen all the episodes yet, but will have by the end of the week. Please continue what you are doing, as it brings great joy to your listeners." So it brings me great joy to hear from my listeners. So thank you, Majin, for that little message. Glad to have you with us. So let's jump into the episode today, because today's guest is a birder and eBird reviewer who lives in the ACT. That's the Australian Capital Territory for international listeners, if you're listening. She started birding as a child, armed with a battered copy of Neville Cayley's What Bird Is That? And no binoculars. She still has all her field notebooks from those days, complete with some quite good drawings of the birds she saw. Over the years, she has birded all over Australia, but loves the dry inland and its birds the most. She enjoys taking other people birding to favourite places. One of the best parts of being the eBird reviewer for her area is supporting new birders. And she's a bit of a data nut, so she enjoys that side of things as well. Fantastic. Lots to talk about today, so please welcome Kim Farley on the show. How are you, Kim? Thanks for coming on.
I'm very well, thank you, Guillaume.
Perfect. Well, like I say, thanks for coming on, and this is going to be a great episode, I think, because again, it's the ACT is sort of, you know, jumping right into that. The ACT is a small portion of Australia, very small. And so I think it's going to be an interesting discussion that we'll have. But before that, the question of the podcast, the theme of the podcast is the joy of birding. So what brings you joy about birding?
I think that what brings me joy is the mindfulness, well, lots of things, obviously, but one of them is the mindfulness aspect. About 10 years ago, when mindfulness became a thing, I was reading an article and I thought, oh, that's how I feel when I'm going bird watching. And when I'm really involved in it, in that my eyes and my ears are outside my head, out there looking at and listening to the birds. So while I'm doing it, I'm not thinking consciously about anything else. And I find it very soothing and makes me feel more sane. And the other thing too is because I've been doing it since I was a kid, I kind of don't know what it's like not to do it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I love the bush and always have loved the bush. And I'm also interested in plants and rocks and insects and other things as well. But birds are my first passion, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah. I see what you mean. Birds are kind of the tip of the iceberg in some sense of the natural world, where you have all these different ecosystems, and networks playing into each other. About the mindfulness as well. That's a really good point. It brings you outside of yourself, to.
Absolutely, it does. And the other thing too, sometimes someone said to me just the other day, "Oh, well, you must really love birds, do you? Do you have birds in cages?" And I said, no, absolutely not. And one of the awfulest things I ever think of is people with budgies in cages, budgies that fly hundreds or thousands of kilometres, and people put them in a shoebox-sized cage, which just fills me with horror. But I would say that I'm probably, all in all, feel passionate about natural ecosystems, I would say. And as you say, the birds are the tip of that iceberg, but all the other aspects are really fascinating and wonderful as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And And in some cases, like for me and for you, the joy of birding and the love of nature starts at a really young age. So tell me a little bit more about how you got into it when you were a child.
Yeah, my love of the bush began with my grandfather, who was a country man who lived in the suburbs. But their block in Sydney was backed by bushland, like beautiful Sydney sandstone flora and big sandstone rocks. He used to sit down there and have a smoke to get away from my grandmother, I think. And when I was tiny, I used to toddle down there and sit on a log next to him, and he'd tell me stories of the bush. So I think it started there. And then my mother bought this copy of What Bird Is That for my brother and I when we were quite young. And she had always been interested in birds, but was a baby of the Depression, and her family couldn't afford to buy one. She used to go and look it up in the local library. So she bought one, and that's when my brother and I started birding. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that. With some of my other guests, they've also quoted or mentioned that book. What Bird Is That? Was that quite an iconic book earlier on, was it?
Oh, look, it was the only thing for decades. It was the only book, to my knowledge, that covered every Australian bird.
Wow.
And it was first published, I believe, in the 30s, perhaps 1930s. And the thing that amazes any birder is that the illustrations were absolutely appalling. Absolutely appalling. They were really bad. And there'd be like 25 of them on one page. And they were paintings from stuffed birds, from skins. So they didn't even have the right shape of the bird. So I'm amazed that anybody ever identified anything beyond a magpie, really.
Wow, really? That's incredible.
But it was the only thing available. So that's what we used.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you have to manage with what you've got, I suppose, and birding is no exception in that regard. But now, I mean, as a side note, when you compare it to the field guides today, it's like in another league, isn't it?
Yep. I've still got my old copy with all the boards on the covers all skew with and covered in stains. But yes, I mean, the guides now are absolutely superb by comparison.
For sure, yeah, and I suppose that's what's also revolutionised a little bit of, along with eBird, the birding scene in Australia and globally. So I want to shift the conversation to eBird and your role as an eBird reviewer. That's exciting. I think I think a lot of our listeners are keen to hear from you, because tell me a bit about it. What's it like to be an eBird reviewer?
It's fabulous. I love it. I absolutely love it. It's I've been an eBird user since it came to Australia in 2014. And before that, I was a user of Eremea birds. So the big data set of Eremea birds was subsumed into eBird Australia. So my oldest list goes back to 1973.
Wow.
From my field notebooks. And nowadays I bird every single day. And I always put my lists up on eBird. So what's fabulous about being a reviewer is I think it's actually the people. I think it's the people that I meet by email or out in bird hides or along bush tracks. And when they, introduce each other and they say, "Oh, Kim, you're the eBird reviewer for the area." And I say, "Yes, and you're so-and-so, and you had those fabulous photos a couple of months ago." So that's a really, really lovely aspect of it for me, in that I've got to know a lot of people, sometimes just by email, but it's very, very pleasant and lovely and rewarding. The other thing I really enjoy about it, and this sort of comes from, I guess, previous working life and things, is that I really like, I call it building capability. So there's lots of people who have joined eBird, I think since COVID. I think there's been a big, And so there's lots of people who've always been interested in birds, or they take a few photos, or they, some of them are very experienced birders. So all sort of people who've joined up, and sometimes they need help with eBird itself, although it's very user-friendly, but sometimes they do. But sometimes they also just need a bit of help with IDs and a bit of confidence building and those sorts of things. So I really enjoyed that side of it very, very much.
Right, yeah, and it's supporting, like we were emailing before, supporting new birders is a really central aspect of eBird, and to grow eBird as well, like so people are confident. And so when you say that you're the eBird reviewer for your area, what area is that exactly?
So it's the Australian Capital Territory, which, as you said at the beginning, is a tiny little patch in the middle of New South Wales, in the middle of Australia. We have a population of, I think, just on 400,000 people in the tiny patch. And I was just looking yesterday to see how many people have put up lists in the ACT. And so it's just coming up to 1,500 people who do that. And somebody did a bit of fun research a few months ago to see how many birders there were per capita in different parts of Australia. And we came out on top. So needless to say, there's lots of birders in the ACT and some interesting habitats, all very easily accessible by car, basically. Yeah.
That I think that's worth exploring more. The eBirders per capita, was it, of each state? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Wow, that's really interesting, actually. You know, I would have gone maybe with Victoria would be on top, but
look, it's probably a bit of a dodgy statistic, really. It was done as a bit of fun because really, I mean, you know, our geographic area is tiny and Victoria is enormous. I think from having played around with it myself last year, I think Victoria does come up second in terms of number of birders, but yeah, I don't know. I can only speak for this rather fun statistic that we take interest and pride in.
talking about the ACT and, you know, its special smaller size. What about the ACT makes it a good birding destination? What are the highlights of the ACT in terms of birding, would you say?
I think because we have, I read that 90% of the, or some large majority of the ACT is actually national park. So there's a mountain range, a couple of mountain ranges behind the back of the urban area, the Tidbinbilla range and the Brindabella range. And those are bush, and they're established to be the water catchment for our water supply for Canberra. So as a result, since Canberra was established, development in those areas has been really controlled. So until the bushfires, it was a very lovely environment, and actually it's still a very, very lovely environment. And those mountain ranges are, by Australian standards, quite high. So yeah, so it snows up there in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so some of the lovely birds we get up there are those high country birds, and sort of concentrated a bit together. Like we get lots of gang cockatoos up there in the summer, and then they often come down into the suburbs during the winter. There's a pair of them who live just next door to me, as in they fly in every morning and then fly out again, which is lovely. And olive whistlers and lyrebirds and pilot birds and just all those lovely higher country birds or wet forest birds. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I was going to say, it's beautifully located, not just specifically with all those beautiful habitats and birds and wildernesses very close to a major city, but it's also very well positioned for as a birding base in some sense, from which to go into New South Wales and down to Victoria. And yeah,
absolutely. We're about a couple of hours from the coast. We're about 3 hours from Sydney. And you can also, and my favourite places of the inland, you can go in there. I can do a day drive to places of, flat red earth and calitris forest or woodlands and really dry, scratchy vegetation with wonderful inland birds. And, from Sydney, say, that would be, you'd have to do a weekend at the very least, but I can do that in a day.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. It's really nice to have that that mobility as well, because it's right in between Melbourne and Sydney, so the accessibility everywhere is really good. And I've never been there, but I'd love to visit at one point. You know, just if only just to fill in the little red on the eBird map.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's true. Having said that, I am a big traveller. I have a camper van and I go away a lot for overnight weekends, weeks at a time. But there's heaps and heaps of birders in Canberra, of course, like everywhere, who stay in their own patch and just collect reams and reams and reams of data. And so the knowledge of birds in our area is quite strong, just because there's so many birders doing so much, collecting so many records. So there's that, that really nice side of it as well. It's not just about a base for going other places. It's also a good place in its own right. Sometimes we get fabulous vagrants turning up. So it sometimes works back the other way. A few years ago, we had a northern shoveler turn up at Jerrabombara wetlands, and occasionally a painted snipe will turn up there too. And of course, Jerrabombara wetlands, middle of Canberra, it's well birded, and if something wonderful turns up, everybody knows within an hour or so, and because of eBird alerts and such things and various other means. So we have people coming from all over, from Sydney and Melbourne, coming up to see the northern shoveler. So yeah, so that happens sometimes.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong in that regard. Also, it's quite a good spot for the Australasian bittern, isn't it? I seem to have read.
It has been seen here. I saw one for the first time in the ACT last November, I think it was. Little bitterns we get very regularly. Aussie bitterns, not so much, but there are some spots around Canberra where they're sort of semi-regularly seen at a striking distance from Canberra. But yeah, little bitterns are probably more our thing in Canberra than the Aussies. Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Then again, I suppose nowhere is really, the Aussie bittern's really kind of difficult bird, isn't it? Anywhere, but yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And so moving, like you mentioned before, that, and I also said in the intro that you sent me that you love the dry inland the most. So just kind of as a sidebar, I'm the same. I absolutely adore going as far inland as I can and seeing the birds there and the habitat, and it's just so different, and it's so peaceful, and so tell me a bit about your love for the dry inland and its birds. Why is that?
I think because I grew up in Sydney on the coast, so it's different. I think I just love those huge open skies, the stars at night, the background, and the rocky ranges, and the plants I love. I love plants as well, and have like field guides to plants, so go and look at those as well. My late husband was a countryman. He came from the Western District of Victoria, and he loved the inland. When I first met him, he wasn't interested in the coast. He was only interested in the inland. And I said, oh, this is terrible. I love rainforests. Anyway, over the years, it all kind of changed, and we did so much travel inland. And because Canberra's within striking distance of those places, then yeah, the love of it just developed from there. And the birds are so amazing. All those incredible parrots. A couple of weeks ago, I was at Lake Cargelligo with a friend, and we went out to Round Hill Nature Reserve to the Mallee area. I always rave about mulga parrots, like just so beautiful, beautiful parrots, and all those lovely little brown birds that are hard to see. Like, I just love it out there. Yeah, I don't think I could live there, but I'm very too far from family. But I love visiting, and I feel very peaceful out there.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, you wouldn't live there, but at the same time, it's synonymous with freedom and holidays and getting out of it all, getting away from the coast and from the busyness of everyday life. You know.
I'm sure if my family lived out there, I'd happily live out there, but yeah, I like to be near my kids and my family as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. And there's just so much of it to see, you know. I could go on forever about that. And, you know, especially before a trip and before a planned trip out there, you know, like the anticipation of, like, you know, and the farther inland you get, the less cars you start to see and the less houses and less trees. Oh, it's just wonderful.
Look, I'm like a kid still. The night before I do one of these trips, I don't sleep. I'm so excited to be going. I thought only kids were meant to be like that, but I happily admit that before a big birding trip, I cannot sleep the night before. Yeah.
That's exactly the same with me, and I'm sure many of our listeners or viewers are going to agree with that the anticipation of the night before of a big birding trip, or even, you know, when you're standing, I've referred to this before in the podcast, but when you're standing on the dock before a pelagic trip, it's like, it's just so amazing, the anticipation and the joy that you get.
As you're standing on the dock there, anything is possible. Yeah, yeah.
And another aspect of birding that I like to touch on the show is photography, and particularly in this case and in your case, photography would be an important aspect of birding as an eBird reviewer. So what are your thoughts on that? So when you review sightings, the importance of photography is definitely something that you have to keep in mind, right? As an eBird reviewer, like, what are your thoughts on that, just off the bat?
When I'm reviewing, if someone's put up photos, I think very good, excellent. I'm really pleased because that makes my job really quick and easy. But equally, I mean, I'm not a photographer myself by choice, actually. Equally, if people don't have photos and they've seen something rare or unusual or special, if they just do that old-fashioned thing, which is write their field notes into their eBird record, then that is totally fine. So not everyone can be or wants to be a photographer. So yes, it helps me, and it brings great pleasure to the photographer and the people who view the photos. Helps me as a reviewer, is what I mean. Brings great pleasure to other people, but I don't see it as vital or even enormously important that people take photos. Lots of folks do, because it just means they don't have to write something and they don't have to get into a discussion about was it this or was it that. And that's great, but I don't see it as a necessary thing at all. Yeah, unless you know, it would be really nice if someone saw something stupendous, something really amazing, like the Northern Shoveler a few years ago. If the first person hadn't photographed it, there probably wouldn't have been the mad twitch that happened afterwards. So yeah,
that's exactly right. I was going to say that maybe the conception among birders is that it's going to be a definite record if I do get a photo, and if I don't, maybe people will doubt it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. But having said that, it has always been that way. It's always been that way, and you know, in the days when, you know, birding records were kept by individuals and clubs on paper, it sort of worked by reputation, didn't it? You know, there'd always be these conversations of, oh, well, so-and-so saw that, but I don't believe that for a second, you know, either fairly or unfairly. And there was always an element of trust in there. And I think that electronic means recording, also, there's still an element of trust in there, you know, like just because you've got a photo doesn't mean, and I mean, I'm sure this is super rare, but, you know, just because you've got a photo, that doesn't mean you didn't fake the photo. So there's still an element of trust in there.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes total sense for sure. And the last thing I would maybe touch on with that is that you know, memory. Yeah, I lean towards the photo side of it because it's just so concrete, you know. So So that's what I mean is that, you know, your memory can be affected by time, and even like maybe half an hour or an hour after you've seen it, if you want to maybe go home first and write the field notes, you start doubting yourself. Maybe that differs among different people and different personalities, but I suppose the confidence level that you would have in recording a rare bird can be justified or changed by having a photo or not having a photo. Do you see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And not being a photographer, I really like going out with photographers, so that if we do see something interesting, they'll take the photo, and that's really good. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's one of the things that I learned as a young birder was taking field notes. And as I say, I've still got all my little notebooks from way back then. In fact, I've got drawers full of them for years and years and years. And I used to, because in those days, and especially with What Bird Is That, and especially not having any binoculars at all to begin with, and then very poor quality ones, was that I would write things down, like seems to have a reddish head or has pink feet or something like that. And then I'd go back and identify it, which is how everybody used to do it. But the process of writing it down and looking at it actually put it in my head really firmly. So I would be less likely, maybe it's just me, the written word has power that the brain doesn't, that the memory doesn't have. So I would find those field notes would help embed it in my head in that way. Yeah. Quite good field notes. I've actually identified things 25 years after I wrote field notes. And I go back and look at it and go, oh, that's a da-da-da. That's a Rufus songlark, I'd say, not having seen one when I was a kid. Yeah, so So quite interesting. The reason I'm not a photographer is that I know that if I took it up, I'd become obsessive about it and love it, because I'm just that kind of person. And the other reason, or it follows on from the first one, is that I have been out birding with too many people over the years we've seen a wonderful bird and we walk away, bird flies off, we walk away and they're dissatisfied either that they didn't get a photo or that the photo is not good enough. And I think, why would I want to put myself through that? So while I'm watching the bird, sometimes they haven't even been able to see it properly because they're too busy with the camera trying to get it just right. So that's really why I don't do photography. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of kind of and there's arguments for both sides as well, which is, with the photography you do get that record and the memory, but then again it's difficult to balance actually kind of absorbing the experience of the bird, and just looking at it. Yeah,
absolutely. You don't absorb the experience of the bird in the same way. I have no problems at all with people taking photos. It's wonderful, it's lovely, and it's great, and it's really important. But I just personally don't want to go there. Don't need to go there, because the joy that I get is from the, as you just said, the experiencing of the bird and the being in the bush, not sort of with the bush and the bird kind of mediated through technology, through the camera. Yeah, so that's just me. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I love it when people put photos up on their eBird records because it makes my life easy.
Yeah, that for sure. And I guess the last kind of to round up that whole kind of conversation is so we would encourage our listeners to record birds with field notes. Would you say that?
Yeah, I would. And it's a very old-fashioned thing to say, and maybe that's because I'm an old person. But I would encourage that, and I'd also encourage people to have a field guide of some sort, either a paper one if they're a paper person, or an app. And I mean, I learnt birds from sitting on the couch with my brother and leafing through What Bird Is That and reading the notes. And even now, if I'm out somewhere camping and I've got nothing to read, I've read all my books, I will still sit down and read through a field guide, and I always find something interesting. And this may be the definition of obsession, but I don't care because it's fun and it's very rewarding.
Absolutely, I'm 100% with you on that one. Sometimes I'll just get my field guide and sit in bed and just flick through it, and and every time you can learn something, like even if it's a minute detail, and that's how you kind of grow the ladder, yeah.
And I think for some folks just coming new to birding, they're quite understandably looking for something that they can put on a device that will help them. So I sort of say to people who are new, I recommend you get a field guide. And they go, oh, a book, it's too hard to look at and it's too heavy. And I say, yeah, you're right, it is. So get an app instead, get one of the field guide apps instead. And I said, use it because it will help, and it's the way to build knowledge. And in terms of notes, I use the eBird app. So I actually make my list as I'm going. So I'm putting down notes as I'm going along. And other people say they don't want to do that. My friends say because they're too busy looking at birds. And I don't know. For me, it works because if I don't keep a paper field notebook anymore, which I sort of regret a bit. But I just do it straight into the eBird app.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the kind of best way to do it in terms of practicality, because it can track your distance and the time, and you can keep count of the birds easily, and I love it. I also love eBird. I use it all the time, and it's just such a great resource for and it's a global thing as well. And I know that you've birded, especially I'm interested in this in New Caledonia. Tell me about the birding there. How was the birding in New Caledonia?
It was so amazing. I went with a small group, like I think 4 or 5 other people. And we went with Phil Maher, who does the Plains Wanderer tours in Deniliquin. And it was just amazing because, islands are interesting. They don't have a huge range of species, but they have we went on little planes out to different islands. So there'd be, I should have looked it up, I was going to, there'd be like the parakeet on Lifu, and then the same species or subspecies of the same on the next island, and another, a bit like the Galapagos and the finches, and I find it fascinating, and also just that opportunity to be in such a different environment as well, really different birds. So not the big range of species that you get in a place like Australia or North America, but really fascinating little microcosms and some very beautiful birds in some very beautiful places. So it's only New Caledonia I've been to, but it really sparked my interest. And then sort of COVID happened then, but my plan, I would love to go to, first of all, the more easily accessible Pacific islands like Fiji or Tahiti, and then getting perhaps more adventurous. I have a good birding friend who spent a lot of time in New Guinea, and she's always saying, we have to go to New Guinea, Kim, and we'll do, little flights here and we'll do all this. And I say, maybe, we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to say it's sort of almost a double-edged sword sort of thing with islands, because on the one hand, it can the relatively low number of species could deter a lot of birders who would rather maybe get the numbers. But then again, on the other hand, you've got the endemics that are only found, on Fiji, on Samoa, and that's that. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of aspect of birding, and yeah.
The other thing I found really interesting, and it was the same with the plants as well, actually, is the similarities and differences in birds in Australia to, because yes, they're obviously very different, but there's some birds that sort of are equivalents in different islands. New Zealand is a nice example too. I've done quite a lot of birding in New Zealand, and my best birding experience in New Zealand is, you go to New Zealand, and then you go to the North Island, and you go to the South Island, and then you go to Stewart Island, which is down at the bottom, and then you catch a little boat, and then you go to a little island off Stewart Island. And there's different birds in all those places, in small numbers, but fascinating and wonderful. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, island birding. And it's, yeah, the accessibility is also another issue with those. Well, not so much now, but, because you've got direct flights. But yeah, you've got to commit a lot to visiting an island, I think. And like I said before, I don't know how I feel about that. Like, because I think, thinking off the bat, I would say I'm a little bit more of a numbers orientated birder than getting the specific endemics, maybe at this point. But that might change. Like, yeah, it's just so. It would be so exciting to get all the, there's crazy birds on these small Pacific islands. That it's definitely a good birding goal.
Oh, you've got plenty of time. Well, I mean, one of the lovely things about birding too is that it's suitable for all ages, and and all fitness levels. So you could go and climb the mountain on Lord Howe Island to see the Providence petrels nesting at one extreme of young and fit, or you could drive your car to the local park and sit in the car and look at the rosellas. So it doesn't matter how old you are, how mobile you are, how fit you are. There's a birding experience for everybody, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I that's why birding is so, and that's why it's a global hobby. And there's other hobbies are global as well, but birding seems like it has to be global because birds are everywhere. That's what's a beautiful thing, and like, again, touching on eBird, like I think the appearance of LGA listing and kind of friendly competitions in each LGA and stuff. I think that really has amplified the birding, I think, worldwide.
I have a personal quest at the moment to fill in every LGA in New South Wales. To have some from every LGA. And when I looked at the map, I realised I had squillions of them already. I think it's only the New England tableland and Sydney. I don't count Sydney because there's too many LGAs in too small a spot. But I just need to fill in that New England tableland over time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I live quite close. I'm in Woolgoolga, north of Coffs Harbour.
Yeah.
And so it's a really nice spot, actually. Yeah. It's kind of a lot of kind of different species mixing together because of the kind of biospheres coming together from the tropics, and then.
Yeah, It's really good, really, really good. Yeah. So, but I think it's good, and I think it's been great that eBird makes things fun. The other interesting new thing that I love in eBird is the trip reports. Have you done any trip reports? They're really good.
Yeah. It's quite new, isn't it? Just a few months ago they introduced that. Yeah.
Just a few months ago, and I absolutely love it because it's just sort of brings something together that eBird didn't have, that nothing's ever had, which is, well, what we used to have is my trip to Broken Hill, and it had all the things you saw and in your little notebook. And trip reports is the same, I just love it. I think it's really fun.
Yeah, it's it's quite user focused, which is on the one hand a very good thing, and the trip reports. I love how you can see where you've been on the map. It's brilliant. It really is brilliant for sure. And there's so much to keep learning about, and with the technology keeps on getting better, and where's it going to go next? It's really interesting.
It's really good. It's really, really good.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start wrapping up, Kim. This has been a fascinating conversation. But arguably my favorite part of these episodes are these closing questions, which is, what's your favorite bird?
My favourite bird is the buff-breasted paradise kingfisher from far north Queensland, which is so exotic to look at. Only in far north Queensland in the summer, and I'm not a good aeroplane flyer, and so going up to far north Queensland in the cyclone season is something that I don't do happily. So I actually saw this one only last year, after having been wanting to have seen it ever since the days of Neville Cayley's What Bird Is That? And I must say the illustration in Cayley was quite good for once, of the buff-breasted paradise kingfisher. And my brother and I used to sit on the couch and read through the book. What bird would we like to see most? And that bird was one of them. So as I say, I only actually managed to see one last year. It was actually in winter, and it was a sort of, or late winter. It was an overwintering bird, and I didn't get a photo, but all the other people I was with got a photo. So definitely there. And it was so beautiful, so beautiful. And I looked at that bird with my eyes, but I also looked at it with my brother's eyes as well and thought of him. So it was very special and remains one of my happiest birding experiences. I'm getting a bit choked up here. It was so lovely. It was so lovely, and such a beautiful bird.
Yeah, I can imagine that experience. And you know, sometimes when you see a bird and it's got a personal connection to you because you've been wanting to see it for so long, or you know, it's linked to another person that you love. It really kind of does have that power. You know, birds are incredible in that way. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. They're so, I don't know what it is about birds that capture us so much. It's the colour and movement, it's the beauty, it's their place in an ecosystem. Yeah, it's just wonderful. They're just wonderful, yeah. So that's very much my favourite bird, and I can't imagine any bird replacing that one as my favourite. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's you know, it's fantastic to have those experiences, and so, and I was going to say, just also, I think what captures us about birds maybe is the mysteriousness of them, because we only, you know, when we see, I imagine when you saw that bird, it mustn't have been more than a few minutes that you saw it, right?
It was actually there for quite a while, and we could see it really for as long as we wanted. It was flitting about with its long tail. Oh, it's just amazing. So amazing. Yeah. It was, they're like jewels, aren't they? They're like jewels. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, the jewels of nature. And what I was trying to get at with that is that you glimpse a moment in a bird's life, and then the rest of it, where is it? What's it doing the rest of the time that you're not looking at it? You know, that's a mystery, which I find quite appealing.
Yeah, I find that appealing too. And there's a sad side to that too, in that there's so many birds, if not most Australian birds, that we don't really know that much about. I mean, you can still read things where they say, you know, research is needed on this because we don't know. And that's very sad as well. But I know what you mean, this little glimpse of a whole other existence. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe that's the source of the joy of birding, you know, in a way, one of the sources at least. But and so now that you've seen that bird, now that you've finally seen it recently, is there another bird that's next on your list that's your dream bird for next time?
Any hummingbird species in the US.
Or South America.
Yeah. Yes. Any hummingbird species, because I've never been there. I know that some of the species are common. My son's been over there and said there was hummingbirds in the suburbs of San Francisco where he was staying. I've never been there, and, you know, that would just be wonderful. That would be wonderful, yeah. And, of course, if you're going to see a hummingbird, you just happen to be able to see lots of other good things as well, don't you? Yeah.
For sure, yeah. I as listeners will know, I had the privilege of living in Chile for a few years, and you get hummingbirds there as well, like in the suburbs of Santiago and anywhere, and you know, the green-backed fire crown, this beautiful little hummingbird with it, you know, the male has an amazing fiery crown like that reflects the sunlight.
I've seen photos, yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, and of course, I think my favorite hummingbird that I've seen so far is the giant hummingbird, which also lives in Chile. It's what a bird! Incredible.
Yeah. Yes, it's amazing, isn't it? And I mean, birds that are on a special list for us, you know, you go to the place they come from and they can be relatively common or very common. And the locals say, oh, that's ordinary. Well, lucky you.
Absolutely, yeah, and also within a same country, like someone from Melbourne or Canberra going up to the far north, it's the same. It's like, wow, like, you know, people up there would say, oh, this is common, but this is incredible for me because I don't see it every day. So
yeah. I mean, Cape York birding and Iron Range birding up there is just unbelievable. I've been up a couple of times and it's just amazing. Gorgeous birds.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the final question that we had prepared was, you know, maybe apart from the Pacific Islands, which is already a goal for you, do you have a worldwide dream destination for birds at all? That maybe the US for the hummingbirds, but is there anywhere else that comes to mind?
Probably New Guinea.
Yeah.
Whether that counts as a Pacific island or not really. But I think there and all the wonderful birds of paradise.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. So my friend might yet persuade me to get on those little planes.
Yeah. Is that the only thing that's impeding you, the flight?
Pretty much, yeah. And I mean, we probably would have gone already, except for COVID, actually. Yeah. And also, I mean, New Guinea is sometimes difficult to travel in, so yeah, but that would be wonderful.
Isn't there I'm just trying to think, there must be a way to get across to New Guinea by boat to avoid the flight.
Yeah, you can. Yes, I mean, anything's possible if you set your mind to it and you've got the dollars to pay for it. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, for sure. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Kim. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed it. So it's been fantastic. Thank you for your time, and yeah, maybe one day I come to Canberra and you can take me out to bird the ACT.
Yep, absolutely. And it's been lovely talking with you too.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'll see you next time. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to or watching this episode of the Birding Today podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to stay up to date with the show, you can follow me on all my social media platforms. And if you want to take it a step further and support the show and also get some cool benefits, you can support me on Patreon as well. So again, thank you for listening or watching, and I'll see you in the next one.